The day my grandmother passed away, she left me two things: her fortune and her wisdom. In the final letter she wrote to me, she included a line I'll never forget: "People reveal their truest selves when they believe you have nothing." I was only 25 when I received that letter. Along with it came a thick envelope filled with legal documents that outlined everything I had inherited. It wasn't just money. It was a legacy. Over $110 million spread across diversified investments, real estate scattered across 4 continents, and controlling shares in several powerful corporations. It took my breath away. My grandmother, Kathleen Roberts, had built an empire entirely on her terms. She had done it quietly, almost invisibly. The world knew her businesses. Her brand names were whispered in boardrooms and printed in economic reports, but very few knew the woman behind them. She had been a mystery to many, including my parents. To them, Kathleen was just a stingy old woman who didn't support their extravagant lifestyle. They never understood her. They saw her thriftiness as stubbornness, never suspecting that she was one of the wealthiest women in Miami. But that's exactly how she wanted it. She believed in strength hidden behind simplicity. Laura. My mother's voice broke through my thoughts. I was sitting at the dining room table, still gripping the letter like it might vanish if I let go. Did that grandmother of yours leave us anything useful? Or just another stack of dusty books? I glanced up at Deborah Lewis, my mother. Impeccably dressed as always, her hair in its usual sculpted perfection and disappointment carved permanently into her expression. For 17 years, she had tried to turn me into her vision of the ideal daughter: charming, obedient, and most importantly, obsessed with status. She had failed. "Just books," I said calmly, slipping the letter and documents out of sight. "And a few old photographs." She sighed, loud and theatrical. Typical. That woman never understood the importance of appearances. Do you know what the Hendersons would say if they saw us driving around in an 8-year-old car? Oh, I knew. I'd heard about the Hendersons, the Allens, the Clancys, every other social climbing family my mother desperately wanted to impress. Their opinions were more important to her than air. "I'm sure they have their problems to worry about, Mom. I doubt they care about our car." "That's exactly what concerns me," she snapped. "You sound just like her. No understanding of how the world works. Thank God Benjamin has more sense." Ah, yes, Benjamin. My younger brother. The family's pride and joy. At 20, he had never held a real job. Why would he? My parents supported his every hobby, every impulsive business idea, every expensive taste. From failed startup projects to his drawer full of luxury watches, Benjamin had it all handed to him. Speaking of the prodigal son, my mother's mood brightened. Benjamin just got accepted into Harvard Business School. We're throwing a dinner tonight to celebrate. All the right people will be there. Wear something appropriate. Her eyes swept over my simple dress, unimpressed by the absence of designer logos or diamond earrings. I just nodded. I didn't bother mentioning that I had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school the year before. There had been no party for me. My parents had spent that weekend cheering Benjamin on at a golf tournament for amateurs. Later that evening, I returned to my small apartment above the bookstore. That was the life they thought I lived, working a modest retail job just getting by. In reality, the bookstore was a cover. I owned the building and 3 others on the block through one of my grandmother's holding companies. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by the quiet hush of the shop downstairs, I opened her documents again. I wasn't just an heiress. I was the architect of my future now. Kathleen hadn't just given me money. She had handed me the keys to power and the truth about who people are when they think you're nothing at all. To my family, I was just a struggling bookkeeper, someone barely making ends meet and scraping by from paycheck to paycheck. They believed I lived a modest life above a bookstore, working long hours for little reward. In truth, that image was a mask I wore carefully, one that kept them comfortable in their assumptions and me safely hidden in plain sight. My phone buzzed, interrupting the quiet moment. A message from my father flashed across the screen. "Don't be late tonight. The Allens are bringing their son, Scott. Wear the blue dress your mother bought you." Of course. Still trying to push that tired match forward. In their eyes, Scott Allen was my golden ticket into high society. If only they knew I could buy the Allens' entire company 5 times over without denting my portfolio. I arrived at my parents' estate right on time, not a minute late. But instead of wearing the flashy royal blue dress my mother insisted on, the one dripping in sequins and bad taste, I chose a simple black one. Elegant, understated, and mine. Outside, a valet greeted me with a look that mixed politeness with pity as I handed him the keys to my modest Honda Civic. He must have assumed I was just another struggling young woman crashing a rich man's party. I didn't correct him. Inside, the house had undergone a transformation. The air shimmered with artificial glamour. Crystal champagne flutes sparkled beneath a dazzling chandelier. Every flat surface was dressed in fresh flowers, and everything smelled of money, specifically, the kind that's spent to look richer than it is. The scent of luxury mingled with something else too. Desperation. Laura. My mother's sharp voice sliced through the chatter as she spotted me in the foyer. Her tone was tight, barely masking her irritation. I told you to wear the blue dress. This one was clean, I said evenly, not missing the way her jaw clenched. She took a breath, likely counting to 5 in her head. At least try to make a good impression on Scott. His family's company is very successful. I nearly laughed. Sitting back at home was a report detailing Allen Industries' financial instability, dwindling assets, legal investigations, and a growing pile of unpaid loans. Their so-called success was mostly smoke and mirrors, but I kept my smile to myself. That was the moment Benjamin made his grand entrance. My younger brother always knew how to command a room, especially when dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than I supposedly made in a month. Our father's voice boomed with pride as he clapped him on the shoulder. There's my boy, Harvard Business School's newest star. Guests gathered around him like moths to a flame. Everyone was eager to congratulate him, to praise his intelligence and entrepreneurial spirit. Not one person mentioned his past failures, 4 doomed businesses, all financed by my parents' dwindling wealth. But the image was everything in this circle. Truth had no place at the table. Scott Allen finally drifted toward me, champagne in hand, flashing the kind of smile he'd probably practiced in a mirror. Laura, he said, voice smooth. Still working at that little bookstore? Someone has to pay the bills, I replied lightly. He laughed, as though I'd told a joke. You know, we're always looking for motivated individuals at my family's company. I could put in a word for you. Thanks, I said, filing away his arrogance like another data point in a spreadsheet. The rest of the evening followed the same pattern: fake laughter, forced smiles, and people measuring each other by their watches and wine collections. I watched as my parents continued to fawn over Benjamin, their pride undimmed by reality. They explained away his past mistakes and spoke glowingly of the future he hadn't yet earned. But I saw something else, something beneath the surface glitter. My father's hand shook ever so slightly as he signed the catering bill. My mother's expression tightened when someone asked about their recent vacation, supposedly a luxurious getaway, but in truth a last-minute trip to rescue yet another collapsing investment. The truth was clear now. They were drowning, even as they smiled for the cameras. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I'd been quietly keeping track. I had watched every decline in their financial records, traced every desperate loan they took, and every mortgage they refinanced to keep their fragile empire standing. They were clinging to a life built on borrowed time. And as they spiraled, I moved in silence. Through a web of shell companies and anonymous holding firms, I began buying up their debt. Every missed payment, every renegotiated interest rate, mine. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because my grandmother taught me to see clearly, to act quietly, and to never underestimate the power of patience. They still saw me as the underachieving daughter, but soon, they'd realize I was something else entirely, the owner of everything they thought they controlled. I owned it all. Every piece of debt, every unpaid loan, every mortgage they were quietly drowning in, I held it in my hands. As I drove home that night in my quiet, reliable Honda, I thought about the words my grandmother once wrote. People show who they truly are when they think you have nothing. I knew, without a doubt, that those words were about to prove themselves in full. Very soon, my family was going to reveal exactly who they were beneath the polished image and empty pride. At first, the cracks were subtle, so small they might have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't looking closely. But I was. The household staff began to take time off. The club membership, once a non-negotiable symbol of status, quietly went dormant. My mother suddenly became passionate about vintage fashion, wearing it like it was a choice, not a necessity. But despite the unraveling, one thing remained untouched: Benjamin's life of luxury. Even as everything around him crumbled, he remained the golden child, indulged at every turn. The moment I saw him casually drive past my bookstore in a brand new Porsche, I knew it wasn't just a stumble. It was collapse. My parents had finally hit rock bottom. But I wasn't in the back room of the bookstore that day. Not the one where I played the role of struggling shopkeeper. I was in my real office, the 38th floor of one of Miami's most prestigious high-rises, the headquarters of Roberts Investments, the company my grandmother built, and which I now run as CEO. From my window, I could see the city she helped shape, a place of glass towers, steel ambition, and whispered power. And now I was part of it. I was it. "Miss Roberts," came the voice of my assistant, Donna, through the intercom. "Your brother just made another withdrawal from your parents' emergency fund." I opened the banking dashboard on my screen. There it was, $310,000 wired to a luxury car dealership. Money they did not and should not have. "How much is left?" I asked, though I already knew. "Less than $80,000, Donna replied. "And their mortgage is due next week." I leaned back in my chair, quiet. I had spent the past year weaving a careful web, using shell companies and quiet acquisitions. They never noticed the names on the letters or the fine print in the contracts. But it was all mine now: their credit card debt, their personal loans, even their home. Every attempt they made to maintain the illusion of success had come at a cost. And I owned the bill. "Schedule the foreclosure notices," I said, calm and final. "It's time." The next morning, I arrived early at the bookstore, pretending to sort through invoices as I waited. Right on cue, the door flew open, and my mother rushed in, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her side. It was genuine but outdated. The kind of bag she would have scoffed at a year ago. "Laura," she cried, her voice shrill with panic. "Something terrible has happened. The bank, they're threatening to foreclose on the house." I looked up slowly from the ledger I was pretending to review. "What? That doesn't make sense." "Your father's had some recent business complications," she said quickly, waving her hand like it didn't matter. "It's just temporary. We just need a little help to get through this rough patch." She reached across the counter, gripping my hand tightly. "Darling, how much do you have saved?" The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. For years, she had mocked my job at the bookstore, questioned my choices, and dismissed my ambitions. Now, she was looking at me as if I were her last hope. "Mom," I said gently, "I make $45,000 a year. After rent and bills, there's hardly anything left to save." Her face crumpled, then stiffened. "But surely you have something? An emergency fund?" "I have about $7,000 put away," I lied smoothly. "But that's all I have. And I need that in case something happens." Without missing a beat, she said, "We need it. Just for now. Until your father's deals come through. Benjamin is working on something very promising." I sat back, folding my arms. What about Benjamin's Porsche? Couldn't he sell it and cover the payment? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "Don't be ridiculous. He needs to maintain appearances. How else will he attract the right kind of investors?" There it was, the truth beneath all the lies and illusions. Even with everything falling apart, they would still burn their last dollar to keep up the illusion. Appearances mattered more than stability, more than honesty, more than family. And as I looked at my mother, standing there with desperation in her eyes and pride still clinging to her voice, I knew they would never change. But I had, and I was done pretending. "And your appearance doesn't matter. My mother snapped, frustration laced in every syllable. That's different. She waved her hand vaguely, like trying to brush away my existence. You're just not part of those circles anyway. Those circles. Her words echoed in my mind. I thought about the invitation-only charity gala I was hosting next month as the sole heir of Kathleen Roberts, a gathering where half of Miami's most powerful and prestigious would be in attendance. Of course, my mother had no idea. To her, I was still the struggling daughter working in a dusty bookstore. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I can't give you my savings. I have rent to pay. Her expression shifted in an instant. The desperation drained from her face, replaced with anger. How can you be so selfish, she hissed. After everything we've done for you? I stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. What exactly have you done for me? The question hung there, heavy and unmovable. She blinked, taken aback, her mouth parting slightly. It was as if she genuinely had to think about the answer. We gave you a good home and an education, she offered, but even she didn't sound convinced. You mean the education I paid for with student loans? The ones you refused to co-sign because you were too busy throwing money into Benjamin's third failed startup? That's not fair. Benjamin has a vision. He just needs support, he needs a chance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Get out. What did you just say to me? I said. I repeated, calmly and clearly. Get out of my store, Mom. And don't come here again asking me for money. She stormed out, heels pounding against the wood floor, slamming the door behind her like a final act in a poorly written drama. Her fury didn't faze me. Everything was unfolding exactly as it needed to. That evening, I got another call, this time from my father. The voice on the other end of the line was controlled, calm, and practiced. The business voice he used when trying to manipulate boardrooms, employees, and now his own daughter. Laura, we need to discuss this situation like adults, he began smoothly. Your mother tells me you were quite unhelpful today. I can't give you my savings, Dad. Now listen here, young lady, he said, his voice tightening. This family has a reputation to maintain. Do you have any idea what a foreclosure would do to our standing? To Benjamin's future? I thought about the foreclosure documents that were being finalized in my attorney's office at that very moment. They had no idea I was behind any of it. Maybe Benjamin can help, I replied. He just bought a brand new Porsche. That's got to count for something. That's different, my father said quickly. That car was an investment in his future. He needs to project success to be successful. And what about my future? I asked, knowing full well how he'd respond. He sighed as if the question itself was tiresome. Let's be realistic, Laura. You work in a bookstore. Your future is, well, it's already set, isn't it? But Benjamin, he has real potential. I'd heard those words before, in different forms, my entire life. They still stung, but they no longer had the power to wound me. I'm sorry, Dad. I can't help you. There was a long pause. Then, coldly, then you're no daughter of mine. The line went dead. I sat in my office, my real office, on the 38th floor of the Roberts Investments Tower, overlooking the glittering lights of downtown Miami. The view stretched wide and endless, the city bathed in gold and steel. I smiled. Soon, they'd learn exactly what kind of daughter I was. The bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a crisp September morning. I arrived early, parking across the street from the courthouse. From the privacy of my car, I watched as my family pulled up in Benjamin's Porsche, apparently the only vehicle they had left. My mother stepped out in a designer outfit, still clinging to appearances, but the handbag was outdated. My father's suit was wrinkled and weary. Even Benjamin, usually full of smug charm, looked uneasy. They hadn't seen me. As far as they knew, I was still behind a counter, ringing up used novels and counting coins. I waited until they had entered the courthouse before following them inside. In my briefcase, I carried everything they didn't know I had: legal documents, ownership transfers, proof of debt purchases, all signed and sealed. My name and the names of my shell companies were on every file. Today was the day the curtain lifted. They had built a life on borrowed time and borrowed money, convinced they could keep up the illusion forever. But the truth was never far behind. And I had waited patiently, silently, until it was time to show them what power looked like. Not loud, not flashy, but quiet, strategic, absolute, and mine. The truth about who controlled the Lewis family's future was finally being revealed. The courtroom was filling up fast. Miami's elite had come to witness Lewis' downfall. My parents sat in the front row, trying to look proud. Benjamin was beside them, slouched and busy on his phone. "All rise," the bailiff said as Judge Shirley Jones entered. She was known for being strict, especially with people who caused their financial problems. "Case number 5022. Lewis family bankruptcy," she announced. "I see the creditor is present." I stood up in the back and adjusted my suit. "Yes, Your Honor. Laura Roberts, representing Roberts Investments." The room fell silent. My mother turned around in shock. My father's face turned pale. Benjamin dropped his phone. "Laura," my mother whispered. I walked to the front and placed my briefcase down. "Good morning, Mother." "Father." "Benjamin." "What's going on?" my father demanded, trying to stand before his lawyer stopped him. Judge Jones banged her gavel. "Mr. Lewis, sit down." "Ms. Roberts, continue." "Your Honor, Roberts Investments owns all of the Lewis family's debts, mortgage, loans, and credit. It totals $15 million. "That's not possible," Benjamin shouted. "She works in a bookstore." I smiled. "Actually, I own it. And the building. And most of the block. I'm the CEO of Roberts Investments. It was once my grandmother's company." Gasps filled the courtroom. Judge Jones called for order. I inherited her $110 million estate. I watched as my parents kept spending and funding Benjamin's failed ventures. I bought all their debt through holding companies. My mother was crying. My father sat still, realizing the truth. "But I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I have a deal." I held up a paper. "First, Benjamin loses all spending privileges and must get a real job. Second, my parents must attend financial counseling and follow a budget. Third, they'll sell the mansion and move into a smaller house I bought." "This is wrong," my father shouted. "You're a daughter." I looked at them. "For years, you ignored me, laughed at my work, and gave everything to Benjamin. When you needed help, you took my savings without asking. You didn't give me anything." "We gave you everything," my mother cried. "No," I said. "You gave him everything. I built this with grandmother's help. She taught me that real character shows when the world thinks you have nothing. And you've made your values perfectly clear," I said calmly. Judge Jones looked over the agreement one last time. "These terms are fair," she said. "In fact, they're far more generous than what we usually see in bankruptcy cases. Do the Lewis wish to accept the offer?" My father's lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently in his ear. They didn't have a choice, not if they wanted to keep anything at all. It was either this or losing everything. "We accept," my father said through gritted teeth. "Excellent," I replied, pulling out another stack of documents. "Here are the keys to your new home. It's a lovely 4-bedroom in Soundscape Park. The movers will arrive tomorrow." Then I turned to my brother. "Oh, and Benjamin, the Porsche will be repossessed. I've arranged for a used Toyota to be delivered instead. Reliable and practical." The next hour passed in a blur. Papers were signed, and agreements were finalized. My parents avoided looking at me, their faces tight with a mix of shame and anger. Benjamin stormed out the moment he could, probably to check on accounts I'd already frozen. As I stepped outside the courthouse, I heard footsteps behind me. My mother's voice was soft, almost broken. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you let it get this far before telling us the truth?" I turned to face her. "Because you needed to learn," I said. "You needed to understand that money doesn't make someone valuable. Neither does appearance or social status. I wanted you to feel what it's like to be judged not for who you are, but for what you have or don't have." She looked down. "Will you ever forgive us?" "That depends on you," I answered. "The house I bought isn't fancy, but it's comfortable. Your new budget isn't lavish, but it's enough. What you choose to do with this second chance, is in your hands now. I walked to my car. Not the old Honda they remembered, but a sleek black Mercedes I had kept hidden until now. Just before getting in, I looked back. Oh, and Mother, I added, that blue dress you wanted me to wear to Benjamin's party? I bought the company that made it last year. I had that style discontinued. It was awful. The look on her face was worth every moment of the last 5 years. 2 months later, I sat in my office reviewing reports. Surprisingly, my parents were sticking to their budget. They'd gone to financial counseling without protest. Benjamin had finally gotten a real job, entry-level, but still a job. He was learning what real work felt like for the first time. On my desk sat a photo of me and my grandmother in front of her favorite bookstore, the same one I now owned. Her last letter still echoed in my mind. Sometimes people show their truest selves only when they think you have nothing. But she had taught me something more powerful than that. Real power isn't in wealth itself. It's in knowing when to reveal what you truly have.